Hello and welcome to our 10-part series, SEPAC Summer School, sponsored by the Federation for Children with Special Needs and MASSPAC. My name is Leslie, and I'm the project director for the MASSPAC program, which supports special education parent advisory councils. And today we're going to talk about running a SEPAC meeting. This is session 4. So some of our objectives today are to help you be able to run an accessible public meeting and make room for your school district to participate, organizing, setting up an agenda for that meeting, keeping it on track and on time so that people really see that as a productive meeting, recording minutes and making them available to the public. How does these SEPACs take action? How do they make decisions? Is it voting or consensus? And with all meetings and with all groups, we're going to talk a little bit about how to deal with conflict and disagreement and maybe set some ground rules for your meetings so that they can function successfully. I think with any meeting, you should always have a checklist. It's just what we need to rely on when we're very busy, when we have lots of things on our plate and lots of issues to consider. So I always start with checklists. I have checklists everywhere. And I think you should have one not only for how to set up a meeting, but what would happen once the meeting is over. So I always think you should review your meeting dates with anybody else within the SEPAC, but also with your school district. Often schools have a calendar of events so that the PTOs and PTAs meet on certain days and times, and try not to conflict with any of those groups or any other body that's within the school system so that people have an opportunity to attend your meeting and not have a conflict. I always think you should invite the district and have them as part of the meeting, and they need to know that schedule in advance so that they can make sure that someone can attend. Reserving an accessible space and previewing that space to make sure it's acceptable to your needs in this time of virtual meetings. Really finding out what that platform is and practicing with the platform, whether it be Zoom, GoToMeeting, or some other platform, whether the schools sponsor the platform or whether the SEPAC has to seek its own account to run a virtual meeting. Advertising the meeting, developing some type of outreach so that people know about it. And we'll learn a little bit more about that agenda, but you need to post the agenda for a public meeting 48 hours in advance. So having this checklist will ensure that that task gets done in a timely manner and you can go forward with your public meeting. Arranging for any of the technology needs, if you're going to have an in-person meeting, food, drink, childcare is so important, you know, to make that successful and so people can have access and come to your meeting. Even if you're virtual, you should arrive early, make sure the platform's working. But if you're in a building, you know, getting there early, setting up the signs so that people know where to go, where the library is or the media room or classroom that you're using, and be there to welcome people in advance. We'll find out why it's so important to start and even end on time to make good use of people's commitment to your group. Really having someone keep minutes, you know, setting that person up with a template, you know, getting that in advance of the meeting so that they're familiar with the process of how you want to take minutes. And I always think you should end on time, make sure you have people there to clean up, follow up, organize your end of the meeting platform. So that's just kind of a quick checklist on how to set up a successful meeting, but we know some of the details are so important here as we go forward in trying to run a SEPAC meeting. Every meeting needs an agenda, whether it be a formal executive board group, a meeting of the whole SEPAC, meeting with the school administrators. Try to always have an agenda so that things that you need to get talked about or decided on are up top at the agenda, and that becomes a priority, and then other business can follow. So your agenda for a CPAC can talk about ongoing work that you have or new initiatives. The open meeting law in Massachusetts does require that an agenda be posted at least 48 hours in advance of the meeting, so that that way people know what the CPAC is going to be discussing at that meeting. They can either make plans to attend that meeting or to provide input to the CPAC in writing or by a phone call, and making that messaging happen so that that information is brought forward in the public meeting. I think every agenda should allow time for parent questions and input on topics, so that the agenda is set up with specific time periods for how much you're going to discuss. And I think it's got to be realistic in your time frame, so that the meeting doesn't go on and on and on, that you set aside a certain time for the meeting, and how much time would be devoted to each topic on that list. And I also think at the end of the meeting, CPAC should consider any new initiatives or topics that should be addressed at future meetings. And then that can be put on the agenda with significant notice to the community and time, so that people are aware that other topics are going to be coming forward and being discussed. So how do you keep a meeting on track and on time? In the live session, we had a brief sharing of all the issues that people had seen that were barriers or issues for CPAC meetings in the past. And some of these were when one person tried to dominate or hijack a meeting. And just so you're aware, in a public meeting, the chair of the meeting, usually is the CPAC chair, is the person who controls who has the time to speak. And you can control the number of minutes that people have to comment or to provide input to the CPAC. And that's one way of controlling somebody's time at a meeting. And it should be on the topic that is being handled right then. If somebody has an additional issue that they want to bring forward, then that can be put on the end of the agenda under new initiatives, and whether the CPAC will bring that up at a future CPAC meeting. But it's really not appropriate to talk about issues that are not on the agenda because there's been no public notice. Having somebody be off topic is really not appropriate. People also brought up the fact that sometimes the special ed administrator had too much control over the meeting. And once again, that goes back to the agenda of the chair asking the special ed department, do they want to be on the agenda? What are they going to be talking about? And how much time they would have to participate in that. So those are some of the issues that came up in terms of using the agenda to control the flow of the meeting, to control who speaks and on what topics, and how to make that happen. Confidentiality was also an issue that was brought up, and I think people should not have a sense or an expectation of confidentiality in a public meeting. There are ways that people can share things in advance, questions or comments that is shared by the chair, in saying that I've received several comments on this issue and I'd like to read them into the record. And that is another way of having some sense of confidentiality on a family if they're concerned about bringing forward an issue, and they can do it through the chair. So that confidentiality was another issue, a barrier to participation, but it really shouldn't be. And I think in any sense that the CPAC should always move forward systemic types of issues and not individual family issues. And that will help in this area of confidentiality. So those are just some of the issues that come up in meetings. There's lots of issues that come up in meetings. Disagreement and conflict will be dealt with a little later. So meeting minutes. Every CPAC meeting should have recorded minutes. Usually the secretary or someone is designated by the chair to record those minutes, and they are reviewed and approved at the next meeting. These are summaries of the discussions, informing readers on the topics that might be that were discussed, focusing on were there any outcomes or decisions, and a record of the vote of the public body as to whether they're going to move forward or made a decision on an issue. And it also should include all information that might be discussed later, because we know some issues continue month after month and go on. And so this is a way for people to see how an issue is progressing or what information is being brought to the public body on an issue. Those minutes should be retained and made available to anyone upon request, but you are not required to, say, post them on a website or publish them in some formal record. Just they're available, and the best thing to do is, if someone asks, to send them a digital copy via email of the minutes. There's a nice guide put out by the Attorney General's office for like another checklist for creating and approving your meeting minutes. And that's available, and there's the link to it. So how do SEPACs take action? Sometimes an issue comes forward and the SEPAC has to decide, is this something we want to raise to the school committee, or do we have to devote some resources to it, so that there would be a formal vote required to have the SEPAC move forward. They can do it in a formal vote, for example, saying, following Robert's rules of meeting, doing it by majority vote and majority rules, or the SEPAC could also adopt a consensus mode of coming to agreement. This is a little bit more timely. It's creative, it's dynamic, but it requires discussion for everyone to say, we all agree now, this is where we're going. It might be the right method for your group, for your SEPAC, and you can decide whether you want to have a formal vote, yes or no, or abstain, or a consensus methodology. And that's for the individual SEPAC to decide. Because we know there might be conflict. It's natural. People disagree on lots of different things. It should be expected. And how is the SEPAC going to deal with that conflict within their meeting? Looking at it in a positive tone, how it increases perspective, builds group cohesion as you're moving along, trying to build a consensus. You're expanding your viewpoint and the viewpoint of those attending the meeting. So there could be lots of positive outcomes to conflict and disagreement within a meeting. That's where the agenda comes forward, and the role of the chair of the meeting in kind of controlling the discussion, and how long you're going to spend on doing different viewpoints within the meeting. I think people need to realize that let's not let this get personal. It's not winning an argument. That's not the goal. It's really resolving it, and maybe the thing that your SEPAC decides is that we're going to agree to disagree on this issue, but a majority decides we're going to go this way, or we really need more information to come to a consensus on this issue because there's such a disagreement or such a differing viewpoint on the issues. So that I think what you need to keep at heart of all of your meeting discussion is the children. They're all there to support the students who are in school, students with special needs who are learning, and what's the best outcome for them. And that, I think, should be your guiding focus and to help you through some disagreements. So ground rules are really a nice way to kind of get everybody on the same plate. Maybe in the beginning, ask your group how you want to proceed. What are those ground rules? How do you share them at a future meeting? Do you have a policy about cell phones in a meeting, confidentiality? Those are great rules for a group to come forward to define, and then they'll own it a little bit better. Starting and ending on time is kind of an overarching ground rule that respects people's time, pacing that agenda to make time for discussion so that there's enough time for everyone to have a portion of it for some input into the meeting. And I think every SEPAC needs to be clear that it's not a parent support group. And that's one of the issues that arose around, a successful SEPAC meeting was to define those issues that could be better handled by a parent support group and provide that support to families outside of the formal SEPAC meeting. And I always think that SEPAC should find ways to make families and parents welcome. Invite them to the meetings, offer to, introduce them to other people so that, they feel a sense of connection to the members that are present. You might have a welcoming committee whose role it is to do that in a meeting or even in a virtual platform. Giving new people your tools that how you operate, whether it be your mission statement, your bylaws, and even the ground rules at a meeting so that they can be successful new members of your meeting. And there might be a formal new member orientation process that you can put into place so that you can ensure that anyone who's new to your meeting feels welcomed, feels a part of the group, and has the tools that they need to participate. So that's the end of running a successful SEPAC. Our next session will deal with family engagement, and we'll have a special guest for that session. So thank you.